What is the state of the SEC right now? Who's going to be in the SEC championship? I think there are several things flying around the conference of the SEC in terms of brand bias. Is the conference good? And I think there are a lot of things that are happening and being said. And I think two things are true, but they are talked about in very different light. I think the SEC is the best conference in the country this year. Not a surprise, they're the best conference every year. The same thing is true that I think they are the weakest that they have been in several years. This is not an SEC that is absolutely loaded with a bunch of great teams. This is an SEC that's filled with a lot of good teams. And I think both are true and they are being conflated and misunderstood. A lot of people are thinking that because there's so many two-loss SEC teams that they shouldn't be involved in the playoffs. And you'll look at like an Indiana who has no losses this year. You look at a BYU who just got that one loss and they should be considered for a lot of these spots, which may be true. It is also true that I think the SEC is down this year. So it's hard to look at schedules and results as a one-to-one comparison from the SEC to the Big 12 to the ACC to the Big 10. They're all very, very different. They all have different strengths of schedules. So while the SEC still may be down in the weakest it's been, it's still the best conference. That said, I think the playoff committee, because of that, is going to have a very, very hard time distinguishing who should get the 12 spots in this playoff field, because I think it's just a huge mess. Because you can't just look at the eye test here. You have to look at results and like the games that are won on the field. And you can point to Indiana's strength of schedule. Great. They're undefeated against it, though. And they've been blowing out every single team that is on there with the exception of Michigan, who they won by 5 points. So, you can't like knock them for that. And also, what's the narrative if Indiana beats Ohio State this weekend? Is Big Ten now considered the best conference in the country? I think it has a very good chance that it might be. And a lot of people will be shutting up and be like, oh, Indiana hasn't played anybody, when they just go at it on the road and beat Ohio State if that happens. Anyway, let's keep this to the SEC, where there's going to be a big problem and big, not a problem. There's going to be a lot of chaos that's happening in terms of what the SEC conference championship game will look like. There's 6 teams that are really vying for the conference championship bid. I think only one of them has a clear path and a clear ending, and that's Texas. If Texas beats Kentucky and beats A&M, whether they win or lose the conference championship game, because in that case they would be in the conference championship game, I think they're into the playoff. If they lose to A&M, I don't think that they're going to make it into the playoff. So this A&M game for them is a game that is going to decide whether or not they are in the 12-team playoff or not, I believe. The other teams, which makes it pretty interesting, how are you going to look at these teams? Let's say if Texas A&M does win that game and you get Alabama versus A&M in the SEC championship and A&M wins that game. So now you have an SEC team who played in the conference championship game in Alabama who has 3 losses. How is that going to stack up against a lot of these other teams and other conferences? Is that Alabama team with 3 losses going to get bumped down, and a Tennessee team who beat Alabama or a Georgia team, will they sit there with 2 losses and get into the playoff? It's going to be a pretty big mess, and there are a lot of things that can throw a wrench into this, and one of them really mainly being is Indiana. Is why I mentioned them earlier. So if Indiana beats Ohio State, that's going to put Ohio State as a 2-loss team. Where do you put them in here? Like someone's going to lose out. So it's going to be tough. And also another chaos scenario. What if Miami loses another game? They lose to Syracuse, their last game of the season. And you get Clemson now in the ACC title, and then Clemson wins. They beat SMU, who was at the time a 1-loss SMU team, whose only loss was to the previously ranked number 6 BYU. And during that loss, they did not have Kevin Jennings as their starting quarterback. So just a lot of things could be pretty chaotic here. But I think there's just simply in the SEC, I think 2 things could be true. The SEC is still the best conference. I think it's hard to argue otherwise. However, I do think it's weaker this year than any other year. we'll see how things shake out. Follow Big Body Ball CFB on all socials.